attention, please. It's true that Metropolitan Jonah came and he was, important, and we'll have Mother Ioana next week as a guest, and then we have Dr. Vitaly Permikov coming towards the end. But we all know that this is the one that you've been waiting for Dima to give his presentation about how ancient practices of the church became the contemporary Russian liturgical services. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to him. Please be attentive. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers afterwards, and that's usually one of the best parts of the entire presentation. Without further ado, Dima, thank you very much for preparing.
Thank you, Father. I will do, at the beginning I want to apologize. I'm not any kind of a lector, really. In fact, it's the very first one I'm doing something like that, and even in foreign language for me. So, sorry in advance. And I told that, if you remember Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, when every animal and Alice herself got wet, fallen into a pool of tears, Alice cried. They were trying to get dry listening to a lecture. Because according to Lewis Carroll, there is nothing more dry than good and long lecture. So I hope mine is going to be dry enough. And the subject that we have was very interesting for me for years, because I was, like everybody else who was born in mid of last century in the Soviet Union, was pretty much Komsomol member and pioneer, and have nothing about Christ at all. Have heard nothing about Christ and the church and its practices and everything like that. And later I became interested in all this, because you kind of see churches when you're in Russia, even the ones that are left, and you still have, like, at one point, that the Russian word for thank you is spasibo. And I never realized that it's spasibo, save God. And how I learn it is, maybe I'll show a little bit of my church involvement in education. I was in the bus, and the bus stopped at the stop, and there was a fence. And on the fence somebody wrote, "Spasibo," thank you. But they made a little gap, because they were writing by the hand, and a little gap between "spasi" and "bo." So, and looking at that, I realized, spasibo. So, you see that even in the language, Воскресенье, Sunday, it's a resurrection day, and so on. So, I started to grow, being interested in the Russian church history and in Christianity in general. And one of my early experience also was interesting in terms of, once I was just looking at surfing the internet and came upon a musical article. A musical article where author was writing about different Christians' musical traditions. About the Catholic tradition, about Protestant, Lutheran tradition, all these kind of traditions. And when it came to the Orthodox Church, he wrote this interesting, simple sentence. When you enter an Orthodox church, you come to that feeling, sense of eternity, a state to which time has no application, timelessness. And then it impressed me quite a bit when I read it. And this guy was no even theologian or something. He was just studying the musical traditions of different Christians, confessions. Yes. So, the human psyche, human brain sense of eternity usually also corresponds to ancients. So if something is old, it feels like if you look at the Egyptian pyramids and eternal gods, this eternal pyramids, blah blah blah. But we see it's very old. It's more than 3,000 years old, and you say, oh, it's eternal. You feel it. So eternity goes back as well as forward. So, and that sense of eternity always in our Orthodox Church and our practices, and why so? And I was wondering how much of the ancient practices of the Church, how much of them we still have today, or how we got to this, wonderful liturgical life of the Orthodox Church. And for that, I have a little presentation here. Let's see. Well, it has only 4 slides, don't be worried. You're going to like only one of them. And in order to, that's another experience of mine. I just love my experiences. So, as from yesterday. Yesterday, my friends, and how to put it, if there are church people, he's completely after. He's absolutely unchurched person. So he heard that Easter, everybody's talking, and so he calls me and says, I heard you have an Easter tomorrow. It was Saturday. And I said, no, in a month. I said, how come? I said, well, it's a different calendar, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, we're going to be in Ann Arbor on Saturday in the evening. Maybe we can come in and we have a little chat and have some tea. I said, no, I cannot. I'm going to be at church. And then he asked this very interesting question. With surprising words. What are you going to do in church on Saturday? So we probably should not be like that. We should understand that there are services appointed not only for every day in the church, but even hourly, as a matter of fact, during the day. So in order to understand how our liturgical cycle developed, we kind of need to look at what we have, right? So, here's what we have. Slide. Where? Where is it?
Just hit F5, man.
F5?
Yep.
Thank you for that. That means how experienced lecturer I am. So, this is something very interesting I found in the internet. This is Byzantine clock. We're talking about Byzantine Empire, the eastern part of Roman Empire that existed. By the way, everybody on the West knows that Roman Empire ceased to exist around the 6th century because barbarians overrun Rome and everything. But in fact, Roman Empire existed until 15th century. And this Roman Empire is known in the East as Byzantium. It's the eastern part of Roman Empire that split at one point between in two. The Roman Empire, the Great Roman Empire split in two. So Byzantium was the eastern part, Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire, and it's known in its history as a first attempt to create a theological state. Let's put it this way: theological in the sense that inspiration of the state and people's life was the Holy Spirit. And from this Byzantine clock, you can see how deeply it was rooted in the everyday Byzantine life. To the English-speaking, I explain what is written here. So this is our daily cycle of services. This is night, this is day. And it's 24 hours, 12 hours of day, 12 hours of... And if you can see here, the first star, the first guards, second guards, third guards, fourth guards, and so on. And the day guards. Guards who were guarding the city. And they were changing every 4 hours, as you can see. And to this even absolutely non-theological thing, the service is kind of connected. We have Vespers here. It's the first service of the day, which may sound peculiar, but if you read the Bible and the very first six days of creation, you will see it was evening, it was morning, day one. So the liturgical day starts in the evening. So the Vesper, about 7 o'clock p.m. according to, and the first hour, and in the ancient world, actually in Old Testament times, the day was ending when sun was setting down. So, and it's about 7 o'clock in that times, and it's the first hour of the night, as you can see here. So Vespers is the first service. Then we have Compline. Compline is usually, we don't serve it nowadays in the church, but it's part of it. It's an all-night vigil, which we will talk about. All-night vigil. We will talk about that a little bit later. Then we have Midnight Office, which is about midnight indeed. And then we have the Matins, the morning service. And if you can see, it starts at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why it is so? Because, and that's unfortunate that many people don't stay to the very end of the Matins in our parish practice. They leave after the anointing. But if they stay, they would hear very interesting words. Father Gregory says, every Matins. Glory to thee, who has shown us the light. Слава тебе, показавшему нам свет. And that was, according to liturgical books, which we will talk about a little bit later, supposed to be pronounced at the moment of sunrise. Actually, to this day, every Russian church which was built as a church from the beginning has a little window in the altar. And the altar always facing east. So a little window, and that window, which is kind of distinguished feature of a church building, was specifically made so priest in the altar can see when sun rises. So, and that's why the matins start that early. So about 6 o'clock when the sun rises, it would be at its end, and in rightful time, priest may proclaim, glory to the one who has shown us the light. And also, and that's why we actually have it in the evening, in the practices of the Russian Orthodox Church. Because it's kind of follow the midnight office, so it's kind of practical to move it to the evening rather than to the morning, because when we come in the morning, sun is already up. So, and then we have a first hour. And everybody probably heard first, third, 6th hour, and that's an hour from the sunrise. It goes back all the way back to the Old Testament church. They also had this prayer for the first, 3rd, and 6th, and 9th hour. And this, as you can see, we have this 1st hour, 3rd hour, 6th, 9, and then the day is over. You don't see liturgy here, because liturgy is kind of sits a little bit apart, and you will understand later why. So, and this is the next slide is a slide you're gonna like. So this is a slide to remember your daily cycle. And very easy, as you can see. Your right hand is the morning, your left hand is the evening. And here you go. Matins, 1st hour, 3rd hour, 6th hour, 9th hour, Vespers, Complain, midnight. And here you got the liturgy. Why liturgy is separate? Because liturgy is not served every day. During the Great Lent, it's not served every day. So, but the daily cycle is supposed to be there. So, and even 2 hands. You can see it here, but it says catechumens, liturgy, faithful liturgy. so liturgy is in the middle, and it is indeed in the middle of our liturgical life. It's where we meet Christ. We meet Him there, and not in a symbolical. We meet Him indeed, in ontological. So, and so this is our daily cycle, and I hope that this will help to memorize the daily cycle for our parishioners.
Dima, we'll post this on the blog, okay? I think people would, seriously, I think people would be very interested.
I can make it a little bit better.
If you send it to me, we'll get it up.
So, and we also, probably many of you noticed that our readers and our choir and our clergy all looking in some books all the time. And indeed, we have tons of books. And even if the list is not that long, but for example, Minian is a whole bunch of books, like how many of them here? 12.
Well,
There you go.
For each month. But the biggest and fattest one is a typicon. I specifically put it here. And the typicon is where all the rite of the church is written down, including very specific things, like, for example, in the evening, the brotherhood may have a little bit wine and stuff like that. Because this typicon will talk about, it's going to be, in Slavonic it's very interesting. А после этого, братья, бывает утешение. So,
comfort. Little
how
comfort.
to translate it, Peter? Could you help утешение?
I'd say comfort.
Comforting.
Consolation.
Brethren. So because this typicon was produced by several monastic communities. And the word is interesting. You can say typical, typical in Russian, typichny. So it was a word for the typical services typical service and practice in the monastery to be written down by the monks and the bishops so they were writing it down, and that's where it got a name, and that's our kind of foundation. Then we have Octoicus. This is the hymnography for singing and reading in the church for 8 tones of the liturgical cycle. Why there are 8 tones? Frankly, nobody really knows. There are hypotheses, but nobody really knows why there are 8 tones.
How do you determine which tone? Is it Typicon?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And the first tone is, I believe, Father, correct me if I'm wrong, starts with Pascha. Correct?
The week after Pascha.
Week after Pascha. So it's the first tone, and it goes changing every 8. So each week is a different tone, and every 8 weeks it changes.
And the reason it's not the same every year is it's almost never, I don't know if it ever could be actually, 52 weeks exactly between Paschas. It varies every year.
But it's not my subject. Octoicus and tones are not my subject. That's let's leave it for Aman, so he wants to explain that.
Vitaly can talk to us about that
Okay.
when he comes.
So, then Minia. Minia is a Minian, in English, is a books where the services for particular commemorated saints are written. All the changing out. Probably, I wasn't very accurate putting this together. Horologium, Часослов in Slavonic, is the book that has daily cycle, actually, in it. The daily cycle we talked about, but it only has a skeleton of the service. All the changing parts are taken from Octoicus, Minia, and Triodic. Changing parts of every daily service, because we commemorate different events, a different saint. And his particular hymnography would be written in Minia. Octoicus would be more common according to the tone. And Triodian would be used at the Lenten period, and flowering, Pentestacorian. Цветная Triod is actually, Peter, you were right. Flowering that's all I found on the internet, flower. Цветная Triod. And actually it's named not because it's talking about flowers something, but because its cover was different in color. Then, like, you have all the books, and they all the same color. But flower Triod had a different, usually red color. So, and people in churches start to call it цветная, flowery. I mean цветная in terms of coloring, in a sense more. Triod. And also flowery has probably to do with, because it starts at Pascha, flowery Triod, and the spring is there and flowers are coming out. That's also probably gives to the name of flowery Triod. So this is our book. Now let's see how it all. Yeah. So now let's see how it all potentially developed. So this is something they teach in Jordanville, periodization of liturgical development. And we have these periods, and this is all the periods while Roman Empire existed. This is sack of Constantinople, 1453 by our Western
No, it's the Muslims.
partners.
No, the Muslims.
Okay, so this is yeah. So these 6 periods here are very important for us in a sense that this is early development of ancient church here. And about the early period we know very little, because there's very little literature. And when we're talking about early church or ancient periods of history anyway, we need to understand one thing. We are talking about a society that had exceptionally, comparing to us, audible skills. So for audible skills. So the person, average person in Constantinople of 400, let's say, or in Jerusalem 400, could easily remember half of the Octavius. It was because they didn't have even books. Very little of them could write. More of them could read. And books were expensive too. It's a printing press that made books cheap. But before that, to have a book, you will have to dictate it to a special man who would be a skillful man, because if you look at these old books, you will see they were making illustrations and this capital letters, very, very fancy stuff. And they would charge money, you know, to get a book for yourself. So you'd rather remember it. And of course they didn't have this kind of devices and this kind of devices, which makes us lazy to sit back and say, oh, I will, like before, people were saying, I will take a look in the book. Now we say, oh, I will take a look in my phone. I don't have to remember that. But at that time, neither books or phones were available, smartphones, I mean, and people were smart instead of the phones. And those people could remember very extensive pieces of text. That's one of the reasons why the gospel was not written down until later, because there were no need for that. People would know, especially gospel, very important words of and about life of Christ and stuff like that. Another reason why early period is not so much written down would be the church itself. The church doesn't write something down just willy-nilly. Oh, let's sit down and write it down. Why not? No, the church writes something, and actually the whole church writing started when there become differences in practices and remembrance of the scriptures and stuff. When we meet, you live in Damascus, I live in Alexandria. Let's say I live in Damascus, Mefodi lives in Alexandria. And I said, Mefodi, you know this letter of Peter, Saint Peter, who says, it's a fine, fine, fine fish in Alexandria, he said. And Mefodi tells me, he never wrote something like that. And besides, fish is very bad in Alexandria. And we start to disagree about the letter of Saint Peter. So the question is, and at that point, church starts to write down. So there is no different. And it also was related to spread of Christianity. More and more people were becoming members of the church in the East and the West. And they all understand it a little bit different. And again, communications were not there. Neither internet, cell phone, all that we easily can call Rome and says, oh, how do you see that St. Peter's letter? How is the fish in Alexandria? They could not do that. They could say, Pope would send legates to the Constantinople. In 3 months they will come. Eventually, another 3 months they will gather together the proper people, and then they start to talk, and in another 3 months the legate from Pope will come back to the Rome, which will take altogether like 9 months. So all that was, so that's why church only started to write when the difference arose.
Sorry for interruption. That's not true for gospel.
Of course.
Because when you
Gospel was started to be written relatively early. Yes.
If you read
But the questions about gospel probably raised one of the first. That's why. I'm just giving general. Yeah, because here I'm talking about liturgical texts mostly. And they didn't see it neither important or controversial for a while. Also, everything that was considering communion and baptism was a sacred, secret knowledge. And it wasn't written. I can give you a Latin word for that. Disciplina arcana. So the sacred knowledge that only faithful might know. So to write it down all over the place was not a practice. Still, in the early period, we can see some citations from the early church fathers who were pointing out certain liturgical practices. Of this, I wrote some of them down. Ignatius of Antioch, Justin Martyr, Tertullian even used to write about that. So we have a very little sort of glimpse of what it was. Then, pre-iconoclastic period. It's called pre-iconoclastic here, but in fact it's a period of rising of monasticism in the empire. And first, of course, in the Jerusalem. When Saint Constantine builds the Church of Resurrection in 335, there very quickly the monastic community gets formed. It's a holy sepulchre monastic community known as zealots. Spudei, yeah. So, and at this point, those of you who saw the, let's say, even paralogia, Jesus' law, they saw this strange word. First choir, second choir, first league, third league. And also we have antiphon singing during the liturgy as well. And it's that early, speaking of eternity and going back, that early antiphon singing starts to appear in the hymnography of these services when they were singing psalm verses. So when they were singing psalm verses and one verse was sung by one, another by another league or choir or one person. So antiphonian singing started there. And actually modern historians of theology, they say that actually it was a practice even in the Old Testament church. And even in the Old Testament church, antiphonic singing of psalms was practiced.
Yeah, they're written that way.
Yes, yes, and in the Psalter you see the directions to the choir director and stuff like that. But for certain you cannot really say, because the current practices are very different from the Old Testament practices, and since destruction of the temple, the only Old Testament church practices that exist and have some kind of identity would be in Orthodox church, actually. So, but antiphonian singing starts at that time, and at that time we see the first cycle of feast and liturgical readings, which they call lectionary. And then the very earliest pre-service book, also dated back then, the service book that the priest would have in front of him. And then the liturgy they served was probably the liturgy, not probably, historians pretty sure, of St. James, brother of the Lord, but it was probably a little bit different from what we know today. That's what they say. I don't know. So this is the very first things we see that documented and historically very sound that we started to see. So one of would be hymnography start to develop in this monastery when the special readings and singings were appointed to the feasts and the saints commemorations, and we see antiphonian singing, and we see emergence of service books for the clergy. Now, and when monasticism indeed took its foot, after, you know, Saint Damien the Great, Saint Pachomius the Great, Saint Basil the Great, in Egypt and the East, when indeed monasticism became very visible and influential, we can say that about this time, we're talking mid to late 4th century, the daily cycle is already started to develop. And the first Chesoslav, first Horologians belonged to those people. They were writing down those Chesoslavs' hourly services, Horologians, in the for their use. So these people, basically, we can say that as early as that, the daily cycle we were talking about start to form and was pretty close to what we have, at least in terms of evening and morning services. The services were rather simple at the time. Mostly they were rechanting of the psalms. And very interesting at that period, two things that is most ancient singing that we have in the church even today. So it would be more than 1500 years. It's a Gladson Light, Sveti Tihi in the evening service. It's very old. Those monks who lived in Egypt had already sung. Can you imagine that? When I say that, I kind of cannot say it calmly. It makes me feel warm inside. I feel them. I can imagine them singing that, standing on their knees in the front of a candle in the desert somewhere in a cave, singing that, or Sveti Tihi. And the next one is another one that you miss when you leave Matins early. It's my favorite song, I can tell you. It's a great doxology, Великое Славословие, that follows immediately after the priest said, "Glory to thee who has shown us the light," and the choir immediately starts to sing great doxology. It's absolutely beautiful words and absolutely beautiful singing, and it also goes all the way back to the second half of the 4th century, when it was already in the form we have today.
Maybe except for the...
Maybe, yes.
It's even contained in some summary form in the Pauline epistles. Sometimes you see traces of it.
Yeah, so this is the earliest fixed hymnography, they call it in the historical books of the church. Now, then we see emerge of Lavra of Saint Sabas the Great. So, and that Lavra roses in Jerusalem. Oh, not in Jerusalem, sorry. Jerusalem got sacked by the Persians in 1614 and conquered by Arabs in 1637. So, at that point, 637, sorry, 614 and 637. So at that point, this rite that started to develop at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is lost. Only because of this Holy Fathers of the Egyptian desert, only hymnography survived a little bit. But most of the rite was lost at that point. And the whole monastery in Saint Saba is nearby to Jerusalem, and all the liturgical life moves there, further from the Jerusalem, and some of apparently some of the monks and some of hymnography makes it there to the Saint Saba, because we see the same hymnography there. But they also started to develop the canons. Canons we hear in Matins, the canons we hear in the meetings during the anointing, and they start to put 9 odes in the canons, as we have today, but the second one gets dropped later on, and so on and so forth. And this, in the very same time, they start to create traparia, seasonal hymns, and stichios. which, and put them in a special book they called Tropologian book. And also, and here comes all-night vigil. So all-night vigil exists only in the churches that follow Saint Saba typical. And why it's so? Because it's a lavra. In lavra, monks live not together, but in their own caves, cells, you name it, whatever you want to name it, in their own little places, a little bit far from each other. Probably as far as they could. So Saint Trufoki Pechorskaya Lavra, the first monastery of the Russian Church, and that's why it's lavra, because you have these caves, and they were digging to be further, to be alone and pray God. So this whole lavra, and if you look at the surroundings of Saint Saba Monastery, it's a rocky area. So if you remember, when midnight office is over, you kind of can go, but it's dark. So if you go, you're probably not going to make it over there. No, seriously, some of our liturgical practices are coming from these peculiarities of practical things that people did back then. That's all about tradition, Orthodox. So and they decided that it's better for our health and salvation, by the way, to stay in church. To stay in church until the matins, and serve the matins, and then have a liturgy, if it's Sunday, and only then go and retire to the assembly. So that's why we have all-night vigil in the Russian Church, because the Russian Church, when the monks were coming from, when the Kiev Pechorskaya Lavra was started to be established, the monks were coming from Saint Saba Monastery and bringing Typicum with them. So, and that's how we got it. Bishops, they write the church rules, and bishops are monks in the Russian Orthodox Church. They're supposed to be monks, they must be monks, and they were bringing their practices forward to the church life. So that's where we get the all-night vigil from. Now another thing is, you may see that once in a while either priest or deacon come out and read Dictinius and all these things. And common prayers and chanters repeat, and you need kind of number of people to do that. Because if you look back at the daily cycle, it was designed, in fact, by monks to be served but by a single monk alone in his own cell. Because none of them really require a priest, except for the liturgy. That's why it's not here. Remember, I told you, I will tell you why liturgy is not here. Because this cycle was designed to be served by a monk or layman at that time, at home. So he could do all that. Vespers, matins, hours, blah, blah, blah. Stop his work at 6 hours, do the prayers, it takes 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and continue until 9 hours. Which is kind of probably the life we all should live, if you ask me. So, and that's why liturgy is not here. But we see on the liturgy this whole practices that clergy and chanters come and start to say, and it's several people doing interaction and stuff like that. So that is coming not from monastic communities, that is coming from Hagia Sophia, from Sophia Cathedral, Sophia Wisdom Cathedral in Constantinople, where I had huge clergy and very loud deacons and stuff like that, because it's a huge building. And those rites of the Dictinius and prayers of the priests developed there. Surprisingly, you will see very little chant in there compared to monastic. Mostly psalms there in the Constantinople Church. And then we come to the iconoclastic period, when the heresy of iconoclastic starts, when they started to say that it's not not right for us Orthodox to worship. Not to worship, to venerate the icons and to value. And what's interesting, especially politically, nothing in Byzantium church history goes without politics, because the state always was getting involved in church affairs, sometimes helpfully, sometimes not, and sometimes without, as the historians say, without understanding of theological issue that was at hands of the church that were causing the split. But since church was rooted so deeply in the society of Byzantium, any disturbance in the church was a disturbance in society as well. So iconoclastic period, from political standpoint, is a fight about monastics, about influence of monastics views, monastic views of lives, monastic influence on the society from the standpoint of theology, philosophy, and everything. So at that point, we see setbacks, sort of. That's why it's important period. We see kind of step back from the monastic practices. For example, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom becomes the main liturgy instead of St. Basil the Great as monastic. Then, at that time, by the way, on the other hand, we were getting, from that time, we were getting our readings at the liturgy. Actually, daily readings from the epistle and the gospel. At that time, back at that time, it was forming the lection, yes. They call it the lectionary, the book itself. Now, at that point, proscomedia got separated from the service and started to be done in the altar secretly only by the clergy, not in front of the people. So, proscomedia emerges as a separate piece of liturgy, as the beginning of the liturgy today. So, and we get many of the hymnography that was coming from monastic communities, it gets to be disused. For example, Kentuckians and Hippocoes that is used during the service, they were fallen to disuse. So we see kind of step back from the strict and wary services, wary in a sense, for those ones who didn't want to be there, services of the early monastic life. But then, as it comes in iconoclastic heresy has been defeated, and with return of icons, the monks' influence returns back. So at that point, there is one very relatively famous monastery emerges near Constantinople. Monastery, in history, it's known as Studaites. Yes. Further, actually, it was dedicated in honor of John the Baptist, by the way. But everybody knows it as Studite because it was founded by Saint Theodore of this Studite. Yeah, and we're talking here about second half and beginning of second half of 8th, the beginning of 9th century. So, and here we get final at this time and in this monastery, the final daily cycle, in order as we know today, finally was formed. And from now, that time on, it's like we know it today. And we're talking 800, early 800. So it's in 9th century, it already emerges. At that time, Psalter gets to be divided in 20 trophisms. At that time.
That late?
Yes. And sticheries and canons, we know today, emerge at that time. So the old canons and their structure, that was finalized at this moment. And then we come to the Nicene period. And in 1204, Constantinople, yeah, John was right, 1204, Constantinople was sacked by the Crusaders. And so the liturgical life in the Constantinople ceased to exist because Hagia Sophia and churches of Constantinople came under control of the Latin Church. And it was already after, John, you were right, 1204. At that time, there was already 1054 is the Great Schism, the split of the church in East and West, and 1020, 04 is already pretty much Latin Church and Byzantium Church, Eastern Church, and we get in the end of the Orthodox practices in Constantinople, and that's when the center of liturgical development becomes in Nicaea, becomes the center further from Constantinople. And again, at this point, we see the first synthesis of Studean typicon that they had in Studean monastery and Saint Saba typicon.
Were they distinguishable? Was the one referred
Yes,
to?
they were. You know, interestingly enough, there is actually in this courses I'm giving you an excerpt from. They give a comparison table if you're interested. So, for example, today practice didn't have all-night vigil. No all-night vigil altogether. At Matins they would read first. In Studite would read first and second, or second. In Saint Saba, third, second, or third. Now,
For sunrise.
probably, but they just probably say daily. They listed daily matters. So hours were omitted on feasts in Studite practice. In Saint Saba practice, never omitted. No midnight office. Instead, the monks will retire in their cell and do it or don't do it, depending on the consciousness. Yes, and Sabbath we would have midnight office in the church, and pre-sanctified liturgy was served every day of Lent, according to Studite practice. Saint Sabbath only Wednesday and Friday, as we do it today.
That's actually according to the canon is supposed to be served.
Well, we're talking about we're talking about formation of the canon in a sense. Formation of the practice.
Sure. He's going back for our mustache.
But the secret council is switching here. Because this is where it is today.
Probably. That I don't know. I'm just telling you that I have this table. Maybe they're wrong. This table.
Well, I mean, just rule 52 of this 5th/6th.
Now he's showing up.
I cannot tell you anything about it.
680.
And where are you? You're at 8 something now, Peter?
We're at 12.
We're at 12.
No, it's already in the Nicene period. And actually,
Well, there was no internet.
there's also what they call this Paleologian period. This is a period when, after Nicene first synthesis of the typicons, two typicons, at this point in Jerusalem, Constantinople is retaken back, and the monastic influence in Constantinople life becomes very, very profound, very, very strong. And with that, as we can imagine, the Saint Saba typicon moves forward and starts to, even there is a synthesis of earlier, say, Hagia Sophia practices and sound studite practices into the, they call it studite Jerusalem synthesis. There are three of them, really. And at this period, it finalizes with the mostly practices mostly taken from Jerusalem Typicon, because it was a time of when, after the war and civil war in Byzantium, the monks became very, very influential in a Byzantine society, because they started to say, look what you've done, basically, without God. And they become, their influence basically finalized the winning of most of the practice of the Saint Sabbath Typicon. And at that time, liturgy as we know it today forms. Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil the Great, it's finalized, and liturgy service from that time on is pretty much like it is today. So, and basically finally is how it came to Russia. It was coming to Russia with the clergy from Byzantium. And especially, as I said, clergy is coming. Future clergy. Future Vladika is coming from, it's a illustration, from Byzantium to Russia. So basically, with the book. He was coming with the book. So that was a Typicon they brought to Russia. And first one was a studite, because if you look at the time, 1051 to 1390 is the time when studite Typicon was in use in Byzantium, and that's when it came. Then,
This is Sabbath too. This is Sabbath too.
so then the period starts when, again, corresponding to the changing of times and influence in Byzantium, in the Russian Church, the bishops start to come with the Saint Sabbath Typicon, which is in the Russian tradition called Jerusalem Typicon. And that's what pretty much we have today, the Typicon. So that comes to Russia at that time, and then the bishops from the church, from the monastery, started to say, very sensible thing in my opinion, what in the Jerusalem Typicon is not suitable for laymen? And the answer was nothing. Everything was good for laymen from the standpoint of bishops of the Russian Church at the time, and that's when the Typicon, we're looking at mid-16th century, started to be used in the laymen, in parish churches everywhere in Russia. And that's what called the Old Rule. That's before the Reformation of Patriarch Nikon. Yes, it's before Reformation of Patriarch Nikon. The Jerusalem Typicon was enacted in full, and it's today pretty much in all believers' communities. Yes, and the transition to the new rite, which was criticized by the bishops, but it was taking place, started with the Russian society getting more secular in their life, which takes its biggest, sort of loudest impact at the time of Peter the Great, when he dismisses the Patriarch office and establishes synod, Holy Synod, synodal period, and that's when all kind of easiness started, all kind of steps to the easy side from the Typicon starts. And we can kind of list them a little bit if you want.
You mean the relaxing of the,
You can say that. You can say that.
we're so,
For example, I can read you one of the historians, Nicholas Uspensky of the Russian Church, saw it like this. In the Russian Church during the mid-17th century, a liturgical crisis took place. Not more less than that, crisis. As a result of which, the all-night liturgy was gradually shortened in a length to its present state of 2-3 hours, so that it has remained all night in name only. The external reason for this crisis was the Protestant rationalism and Peter the Great in sort of being a fan of Western styles of life again, and taking semen from the Lutheran Church and stuff. From the Germans were especially like the Latin. So, and the internal reasons for the crisis were excessive worship of the letter of Jerusalem Typicon by the Greekophile party in Moscow. Didn't know that.
didn't mean excessive worship of the letter of the Typicon
Yes.
by the Grecophiles.
Grecophiles party in Moscow. So they were kind of making probably a bad impression and was not nationalistic enough. Grecophiles. No.
It wasn't Russian.
Yes, it wasn't Russian. If it was
This
excessive
doesn't
Russian,
seem Russian.
it wasn't. If it wasn't Russophile, it might have been worked better. So in any case, we have this steps back, and pretty much all the shortenings we have, you know, less kathismas, shortening of the old night vigil, all that we have from that time on, going on.
What do you mean less cathedrals?
Well,
We have a schedule for the Kadisman. No.
yes.
Even as he needs.
Not only that. Actually, not only that. I can tell you more. Actually, if you go to the seminary today, they will ask you, as a future priest, how would you shorten the services for your parish life? And one of the correct answers is to exclude a kathisma from if they're treated. So that's what I'm saying. And that practice goes on from that time. It was gradually increasing. Of course, in the monastery, it's something that that is not practiced in the monasteries today. It's not practiced. They usually read full kathisma in all of them. With the exception, for example, of some monasteries where they have a big number of laymen coming to the services, like for example in Moscow, Selinsky Monastery, they shorten one of the kathisma from the old night vigil. Even in the monastery. So we are weaker. You could see that during the, for example, during the all the periods when monastics were very prominent and very influential in the society, you always would see more and more stress on the spiritual life, on divine services and stuff like that. And we are much weaker than them. We should admit it, and the weakness sometimes, we're all sinners, feel like it's too long of a service, too long of a lecture, and stuff like that. So on that prizing note, I would like to wrap it up.
What consolation do you have for it?
I think that church practices, they took a very long evolution, I would say. Would not be afraid of that word. Evolution from ancient practice, and we still have light of ancient church in our services, in hymnography, in the daily cycle, in the books. Typicon is still there. If you want to serve according to Typicon, you can do it. And some monasteries do quite a bit, and so on and so forth. So we are pretty we're still traditional Orthodox Church, where the practices going all the way back to the
Nothing
4th
important
century,
happened after that.
that still have a sort of foothold in our services today. So, I would say that, for sure.
Questions for Dima? John, did you have a question?
Well, I have more of observation. I think it goes back much further than I felt from your talk. And let me explain that in two senses. One time after service here, I talked to a fellow from Ethiopia who'd studied in the Soviet Jews and was Coptic in his origins. And his comments was that your liturgy is a shortened version of theirs. If I remember right, and I think Father can tell me on this, wasn't there a split between the Coptics in the 2nd or 3rd century and the rest of the church?
After Chalcedon.
To Macedonian council.
The other thing that reflects is something that struck me when I was invited by Jewish friends to a Passover. And there is so much you can see in your service that comes directly from that. You know, for a Protestant, that was really mind-blowing.
That's actually, we actually refer to that, what they're doing, as our service. So it's belongs
But
to us
it's
now.
definitely true that the church is a continuation, I mean, of the Old Testament, because who were the first Christians, right? And they knew temple worship, so they just kept doing it, right? And it was a temple worship of Christianity.
Father Leonie Kishkovsky's mother commented to me, she had a Jewish friend that invited her also to Passover, and she said it's even the same prayer.
Yeah, well, of course we use the Psalter also, so
Yeah.
Well,
it's very
of
similar.
course we use Psalter and
Old
as
Testament.
I mentioned that the early practices were resembling, according to Holy Fathers, were resembling the Old Testament church. As Father said, they didn't know anything else, the first Christians, because they were all Jews. But it was a little bit outside of scope of this lecture, because this lecture was about Christian worship development, and especially that actually has some historical documents behind it. So that was kind of, I'm sorry I wasn't very maybe clear about that, but I was trying to stress, as I thought, that it's where we have it written final. We have a document that says, this was a practice in 235, something like that. Because what you see at your friend's Passover, it's not something maybe authentic, because it's written nowhere. The tradition is broken. You know, with the destruction of the temple and stuff like that. So, from historical history standpoint, from historical science standpoint, it's different things. You view them differently. Something that has documented history or something that doesn't have a documented history.
That's a good point. Other questions or comments?
I have.
Nice and loud so we can hear it.
So, Western Rite and Eastern Rite. Oh.
Bring in the organ.
How they developed, I mean, like, even before the split.
Even before the split, what's interesting, I just recently was written about the history of schism, and you should realize that the schism happening as a formal when Pope Legats came to the St. Hagia Sophia in 1054 and put down the discommunication on the altar of Hagia Sophia in 1054. Before that, the empire had been split since 6th, 7th century. Then the common cultural space was broken at this point. Communication broke. Then languages started to be different. Latin West versus Greek East. They were speaking different languages. Then with the merge of Islam and in Africa and North Africa and the Mediterranean Sea, which was a main route between East and West. It was like a highway between, western parts and Constantinople. Yet dangerous to travel because there were Saracen pirates who were going in and capturing, including, by the way, Saint Palma. He was captured in his travel, and for a year he was trying to be sold as a slave in the markets. So all that started to happen, which just a social division between East and West, that apart even from different practices in the churches that start to emerge on that basis. And any misunderstanding was made hard to resolve with the fact of different language, developing a different culture. And we're talking, you're saying, like, look at the periods here. 300 years. Yeah. I mean, it looks kind of, five periods, but 300 years, 200 years. We're talking about extensive periods of time with the average lifetime of a person about 40 years.
Yeah.
Especially here.
All of American history.
Yeah. That's right. If you look at the order, right? Early church, again, 400 years. So it's, even if it's that very few little points, but it's significant amount of time between them and during them. So during that time, the practices in the church were drifting apart. Of different understanding of, with a different understanding of some theological moments of the church, which, and the difference in language didn't make it any easier to find the common ground in the culture. So, and probably there should be another full lecture of how, if somebody is interested, how Latin writing has developed.
Absolutely.
But-
What actually happened to these manifold Latin rites, which pretty much nothing survives.
That's tricky.
But can you really these days take the Western Rite service and to say that that is Orthodox enough?
No, you cannot.
But why do we have Western Rite Orthodox Church?
Well, there are some Western Rite parishes, but it's a really complicated situation because no one really knows what the authentic Orthodox rite was before the schism. So it's
extrapolated.
it's a difficult situation. The bishops look at it as a way to bring people to the faith that might be somehow otherwise not be able to find orthodoxy. But
Well, they cheating them by saying it's okay.
well, there's definitely a difference of opinion. There's no doubt about that. But we're not going to put that on YouTube. So we will let that sleeping dog lie.
Dima's going to answer that question
Yeah.
for YouTube.
So actually, I think we should probably end because we are going to serve Vespers today. So thank you, Dima, for excellent lecture.
Excellent.